this event today and co-sponsoring it with us. I'm actually here in the stead of Jeff DeBelko, who is the director of the ECSP program, the Environmental Change and Security Program, because he's in Tokyo right now and couldn't make it down. But they are the ones who have been liaisoning with the International Reporting Project over the last several years and are the genesis behind our relationship with the IRP. Now, I want to welcome you. We always have a little spiel that we have to give about the Woodrow Wilson Center. I've got it down to a pretty short version, but it's important, I think, in this context because, as you know, this center is the official monument to former President and late President Woodrow Wilson, who was our only real academic in the sense of having a doctorate, being the president of a university, Princeton, and a genuine academic career. I was recently in Staunton, Virginia, at his birthplace, and was quite amazed at the prolific output that he had in writing. But he believed very strongly in bringing together the world of ideas and the world of experts, practitioners, academics, and et cetera, people who are working in the field and had real life on-the-ground experience. And that, in essence, is what we do here, trying to bring together scholars and practitioners with those in the policy community. And I think today's event is a perfect example of that, because what's more important than engaging, informing, and working with journalists who are reporting on the international affairs that go into making up a lot of the policy formulation on the issues that they cover. That's all I'm going to say today. I'm going to be the moderator of our program, and I'll give you our rules when we start on questions and answers. We have several presentations to make, but I want to invite up to introduce our panel John Schidlovsky, who is the founder of the International Reporting Project, which he founded in 1998. He's also a veteran international correspondent himself, but I think you have the bios before you, so I won't go through the details of that. Just invite John to come up and introduce our panel and say a few words about the project.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks. It's a pleasure to be back here again. This is, I think, our third Gatekeepers presentations that we've done together with the Wilson Center. And I want to thank the Africa program and the Project on Leadership that Steve directs, as well as the Environmental Change and Security program here at the Wilson Center for being wonderful partners and collaborators. They've helped us over the years since we founded this program in 1998, getting American journalists to be better informed before we send them overseas to do international reporting. I began this program back now, we're in our 13th, almost 14th year, because as all of us know, the mainstream U.S. media has begun to close bureaus, and because of budget cutbacks and changes in the profession, it's a lot more difficult for journalists to find opportunities to cover international news. So we began this program and have spent close to $15 million over the last 13 years or so, sending more than 330 U.S. journalists to more than 90 different countries around the world. We began with giving grants to individual reporters who have traveled, again, more than 90 countries. But after a few years of those intensive 5-week reporting grants, we realized that we needed to do something more, and that was to enable the editors, the people that we come to call the gatekeepers, the people who actually make the day-to-day, week-to-week decisions about what gets into print, what gets on the air, what gets online, to give the editors a chance to get out of those newsrooms and to see for themselves, again, the importance of international affairs. So we began what we call the Gatekeepers program. It's an intensive sort of boot camp expedition style. We try to exhaust them to almost to the point of exhaustion, but not work them too hard. A 2-week introduction to a country. We do this twice a year now. We have far more applications than we can possibly accept. And we just got back less than 2 months ago from our latest trip, which was to Liberia. We can ask, why Liberia? Well, actually, from the beginning, our program has always had a strong focus on Africa. Of our individual reporting fellows, more than 1/3 of them have reported from Africa. We focus on Africa because we feel that's probably the most undercovered and most neglected part of the world as the U.S. media wind down their coverage of the world. And 6 of the 14 Gatekeeper trips that we've organized have been to the African continent. And we're about to announce our next trip for this spring. Probably next week we'll announce it. We'll do 2 this year, and almost certainly one of those will be, again, to an African country. The journalists that we select for these trips come from a wide range of news organizations. You have several of them here, but we took 11 different journalists, and the total reach of their audiences is millions. We have people from the NPR, from PBS, from Washington Post, and they're becoming very productive. The original motivation of the trip was just to give the editors a sense of the issues so that when they come back, they better understand what's going on in those countries, and then they can direct the coverage by their staffs. Well, as those staffs who get opportunities to go overseas diminish, increasingly the gatekeepers are themselves using these trips to do reporting. So if you check our website right now, you will probably see more information about Liberia and more reporting on Liberia than there has been in years. They've been very prolific and in all media. One of our panelists, Suni Khaled, is currently doing a 5-part series on Liberia on his radio station, and he has to get back tonight to finish the last piece for that one. So what can we do in 2 weeks? 2 weeks is not 2 months, it's not 2 years, it's not a full-time bureau in a country, but it's better than nothing. And so we try to organize a trip where they get a sense as much as possible of all the major issues that are taking place. And Louise Leaf, who's the deputy director of our program, did a great job, I think, in putting together a comprehensive program. So during their 2 weeks, we met with President Sirleaf. We met with members of her cabinet. We met with politicians in all parties. We met with many former combatants from Liberia's 14 years of war. We met with women activists. We met with students from all levels, college, elementary schools, high schools. We met with many media and journalists. We met with law enforcement officials, police. We met with the UN commander in the country and some of her troops. We went to the countryside. We went up country to Banga and Ganta. We met with rural chiefs, villagers, health officials, environmental activists, business leaders in Monrovia and in other towns, with NGOs, both Liberian and foreign, with humanitarian groups, with diplomats, with religious leaders. It was a wide assortment of people and a very busy experience. So what you're going to get today is just a snippet from several of them of what we spent our time doing. And if you want to see complete reports, come to our site, internationalreportingproject.org, or go to their sites where their stories are also displayed. With that, let me just briefly introduce the panelists before I turn it back to Steve. Suni Khaled is the managing news editor of WYPR in Baltimore. Suni has reported throughout Africa, Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and the Caribbean on many breaking international stories. He attended Howard University here in Washington and also attended Johns Hopkins SAIS, where our program is based here in Washington. Suni majored in African Studies and International Economics. During his career, he's worked as a journalist with Time Magazine, the Washington Times, USA Today, the Baltimore Sun, my old alma mater, the Voice of America, and NPR, for whom he was a diplomatic correspondent and Cairo bureau chief. Next to Suni is Ed Robbins, who's an independent, award-winning director, writer, producer, and video journalist with 20 years' experience. His primary form has been hour-long programs with outlets on PBS, Discovery, National Geographic, ABC, BBC, and the New York Times. He's done many international documentaries that have taken him for extended stays to Afghanistan, Burma, Colombia, Iraq, India, Nigeria, Pakistan, Syria, and elsewhere. Finally, Teresa Wiltz is a senior editor at TheRoot.com, where she helps to oversee daily production of the African American web magazine. She's also been a senior culture writer for the publication and helped to create multimedia packages for the website. Previously, Teresa was a staff writer for the style section of the Washington Post and also covered life and culture in Afghanistan in the post-Taliban era in 2002. She has a degree from Dartmouth College and a master's in journalism from Northwestern University. So it's a pleasure to introduce these panelists and turn it back over to Steve for presentations and Q&A. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, John. We really appreciate that. A very dynamic program, and we're really proud of being involved with it. I take great pleasure in today's presentation, not just because I think it's worthwhile, but because Liberia is a country that we're working in the post-conflict setting there and trying to help with the reconciliation and the rebuilding process through my Africa and my leadership programs. And as a matter of fact, played a little bit of a hand in setting up the trip of the Gatekeepers here. So we're going to turn it over to them in the order that they're sitting to my left here. But I want you to be sure that we don't raise any expectations here. When we get to Q's and A's, you can bring up any subjects you want, but we're not focused on any specific aspect of Liberia right now, development, the coming elections, anything in particular. We've asked the journalists each to just focus on whatever they want to, something that really moved them while they were there, some issue that they're working on right now. So it's going to be quite a varied presentation. But then we can come back because they spent some time there. They've got some deep insights to what happened, and we can discuss anything you want to about Liberia. Okay, Sydney.
How's everybody doing? Come on now, give me a little bit of I want some feedback here, okay? All right. Okay. Politics and journalism are so much alike, you know. As an editor, having been seduced by the dark side of the force when I was a reporter, the bottom line is always, what have you done for me lately? That's why I basically tried to look at the economics, the bottom line in Liberia. I've been to several countries, and I was in Somalia for the invasion. I was in Haiti, and one of the things I really wanted to do to try to bring the story home to folks was like, how do people survive? What kinds of jobs do they have? How do they feed their families? So I did a lot of stuff on economics, and I think the thing that was most challenging about Liberia is that, you know, Liberia has had 2 civil wars. They've had 14 years of war in the last 21. They've had 30 years of political stability. So I was interested to see how the economy is working. You have a country that has an official unemployment rate of about 85%, and that was just staggering to me. One of the first things that we did, and I just wanted to, number one, first give complete credit to my colleagues and also to John Schidlovsky and Louise Leaf. I've done a lot of gigs in a lot of different places. I've never had a producer who is as competent and as hardworking as either one of these people. I do not know how we made every single appointment. I think we had about 20 appointments every day, and I don't even think we slept. But anyway, I wanted to thank both of them and my colleagues. But one of the first things we did was, you know, when you're preparing for one of these gigs, you sort of look at the history, and the history of Liberia as a modern state and the Firestone Corporation there's a symbiotic relationship which goes way back when a nearly bankrupt Liberian government, which was concerned about being invaded, signed a deal with Harvey Firestone Jr. in 1926 and gave away 10% of the country's arable land to establish what is the Firestone Plantation. And, you know, as an African American, when anyone mentions the word plantation, I sort of get a little nervous. So we went out to the Firestone Plantation, which is on more than 100,000 square acres. It's the largest natural rubber plantation in the world, and we got to see how it was tapped. And they told us about, you know, how they do things, and we met with staff. That's employing about 7,000 Liberians. About 15,000 of their dependents live on this property. But one of the great things that we did is that, you know, Firestone basically had the dog and pony show. I didn't see the pony there, but I did see the dog. And there was, as a resident of Baltimore, one of the things that was great was the executive director of Firestone Liberia had a really strange accent. It's from Dundalk, which is outside of Baltimore, which is where he grew up. And to hear them give the spiel about, investing in the country, and that's one good thing. But there's another side to that, too. And Louise was great in being able to find out Green Advocates, which is a local NGO, which has basically been holding Firestone's feet to the fire. Alleged charges of alleged dumping and collusion with the government. That was one very, very interesting thing, because it's something that really doesn't come out. And then you go into Firestone's history. Right after Firestone started the plantation, the Liberian Army press ganged the locals by the thousands to work on this fire plantation, which, of course, coincided with the rise of the auto-making industry in the United States. And, of course, I grew up in Highland Park, Michigan, which was, of course, the site of the world's first auto assembly line, right about a mile from where I grew up. So I sort of saw a personal sort of commitment. But I wanted to see how Liberia could make a go of things, because one of the things that I had thought we were going to do when we went to Liberia was continue to write an obituary. This is a country, a failed state that was dead. There was nothing to look forward to. It was completely destroyed. No one would want to come in and do anything. And when we got there, a lot of that post-war, a lot of the war damage has been sort of painted over and filled up and everything. But you're looking at a country with a very small population, only 3.5 million, which has huge mineral wealth. We're talking, they got diamonds. They had made some discoveries of offshore oil, which they think will be coming on. They have, of course, the rubber. They have timber, and the Chinese and the European consortium have just signed $7 billion worth of deals to restart their iron ore mining. They also have location. Steve remembers the old days when he used to get on what was commonly called to as the milk run, where you had Pan Am, I guess, went through West Africa and Liberia. Delta just started direct flights to Liberia, which takes 7 hours. One note, I was unhappy with one aspect of the trip, and that's because Louise decided to take an American carrier to Brussels. And then we took the Southwest Airlines of the European carriers, Brussels Airlines, to get to Liberia. So my back has still not recovered, Louise, and I hope you don't do that to any other peacekeepers. But the fact of the matter is that Liberia has a lot of good points going for it. And, for example, Delta is flying into Roberts Field Airport, which the U.S. Army built in World War II to help resupply the troops to North Africa. So it is now larger than Kennedy, LaGuardia, and Dulles Airport combined. There's a huge potential there, and Lockheed Martin is actually on the ground there trying to restore that. So I figured you got small population, great location, you have mineral wealth. How can my thing is, how can you turn this around? Because Liberia was a failed state. And to me, how do you get it turned around? How do you make it relevant for the Liberians themselves? Because it's great when you talk about foreign investment, but if the people on the ground can't feel it, touch it, smell it, it doesn't mean anything at all. So that's one of the things that was a real challenge. One of the big complaints that we got, all of the peacekeepers, there were two ones. There was corruption, because a lot of foreign investments coming in, people see things being done, but they don't see anything in their pockets. And the second was roads, infrastructure, because the infrastructure of the country was devastated. I think there are only 500 miles of paved roads in a country of 3.5 million. Now, Firestone has about 400.
Yes, that's right.
On the plantation, they have about 400 miles of paved roads there. They're getting investment in, and Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who is a former World Bank economist, said that the country will not need, told us, country will not need any foreign aid within 10 years. Well, that sounds really ambitious for a country that was just absolutely destroyed. They do have competent leadership. You can see some of the signs, and of course, Steve has the eyes of someone who has seen Liberia through the years. I came out of the trip, I did one piece on economics, but I'm going to revisit this. I came out of this trip fairly optimistic about Liberia's future, and that's unusual because the countries that I'm usually in, the indicators are down, and you're expecting that things are going to get worse. Liberia has tremendous challenges, but it seems like they have a competent leadership, political leadership. I've talked with businessmen who are dealing with Liberia, and it's not like jumping through hoops in Nigeria or Kenya or Egypt or some places like that. So they're encouraging investment and people are going in. So that was the thing that really sort of surprised me. I did not expect to go to Liberia and feel optimistic, even mildly optimistic about its future. My pieces are online, or at least 4 of them are online, and if I hurry back to Baltimore tonight, you'll have the 5th one will be online sometime tonight. But basically, those are my sort of observations, and I'll hand it over to my buddy Ed Robbins.
Just go for it. Hi. I'm a filmmaker, so I have a slightly different approach and view in terms of what I'm looking for and how I go about telling a story and the kind of ways I would choose to portray the people and things I learned about in Liberia. And I also this work is going to be on time.com is essentially where my outlet would be, and the International Reporting Project.org. So it's a national audience, so they have to be stories that pull people into a place that they may not even. I mean, my most common reaction to Liberia is, where? I mean, it's America. I mean, Africa's one big place, and so with those challenges, I actually have it easier than some of the other people for today, at least, in that I brought one of my cut pieces that will go up in a few weeks once my editor returns from vacation at Time Magazine. So what you're seeing is an unvetted piece where the stock footage still has big names of the company I'm getting the stock footage from on it, and the sound's a little funky, but you'll see a piece. And while we were there, we were introduced to some of the Women's Peacemakers Network, the incredibly important women's group that essentially helped bring peace to Liberia. And I was very intrigued and charmed by Tweeta Sugars Cooper. And I thought in her, she embodied a certain power of a lot of Liberian women and her dedication and also her love for the country. And I was attracted to the idea of capturing the flavor of the country beyond Monrovia and capturing it from a person's point of view rather than my imposed point of view. I mean, obviously, there's the imposed point of view always, but trying to use her story of I don't want to give too much away about the story, but trying to use her story to both give a flavor for Liberia outside of and these are great issues, but outside of the rape and the poverty and the AIDS issues that tend to be portrayed, but still infuse the story with some issues she's grappling with in this other place you're going to meet her in. So with that set up, I will request the lights get dimmed, and we'll roll it. Hopefully, everything will go fine. It's about 5 minutes. It's about 5 minutes long. In Monrovia, Liberia, Tweeta Sugars Cooper is visiting a local chapter of the Women in Peacekeeping Network.
My involvement with the peace movement in Liberia started in 1994.
Sugars is renowned as a founding leader in this extraordinary women's movement that took on the warlords to end 14 years of civil wars. There are searing images from that time of child soldiers and ragtag armies who fought, raped, and burned their way through Liberia, on and off from 1989 until 2003, the year these women's actions finally brought peace.
I don't see the war coming back. First of all, as women, we have decided that we are going to do whatever it takes to sustain the peace.
No matter where we are, we will always be there to ensure that there is peace.
In her youth, Sugars moved far from Liberia to attend university in Bern, Switzerland. But ever since, even through the horrors of the war years, she stayed in Liberia to help. Now, with peace at hand, she's pursuing new dreams in the small place she was born in.
What's up? Yeah, come here.
Here we speak Bassa and then we speak Liberian English.
Are you doing all right?
We just like, Dawa. Dawa you got it. That's Liberian English. People. Okay, we can't see that.
Yeah.
I was born here.
This is where they
My grandparents, everybody, all of my relatives have a passion for this place.
Edina has grown on a thin spit of land with a confluence of 3 rivers on one side and the ocean shore on the other. In this town, homes are so spread apart you wouldn't even know that 11,000 people live here. But there is a new municipal building where the mayor is to be found.
I've been mayor since April, so it hasn't been very long.
It may seem like a small town job, but she says the challenges are many, the budget hardly there, and there's far too much to be done.
As you all know, we have to really roll up our trouser legs.
Liberia was recently ranked among the world's 5 poorest countries, and the basic problems of development here, Sugar says, reflect problems confronting all Liberia.
And it's like, okay, we need a road, we need schools, we need clinics, we need teachers, we need city workers, we need, okay, and we need immediately, we need today. Everything is a priority, and that is what I'm having difficulty doing. Have you included any girls in your plans? Are they playing kickball? Are they participating in anything? We make up 51% of the population. You know, the attitude sometimes of people who have been devastated by war. At times, I see people as feeling helpless, you know, feeling that there was no hope. At least now I'm beginning to see a revitalization of the hope. I told you to be smiling.
Hope against great odds is what first brought former American slaves to cross the Atlantic and settle on this land.
Actually, my family, the King family, was one of those families. Freed slaves. They had a dream, they had a hope. They started something. We have the history.
The former slaves who founded Edina in 1832 made it a prosperous cultural center, though, ironically, they made an underclass of the native Africans. Over time, Edina's fortunes fell, and then when the Civil War came, rebel soldiers looted and burnt it.
Hello. You're feeling what it went, huh? I'm being bitten by an ant.
My dream for
That's
Edina
next to nature.
is to create an eco-friendly Edina. A place where families can come and live, and you can get fresh fish and shrimps and everything else from the river, that you eat the food that is grown here. I want to see Edina developed, yes, become modern in a way, but I don't want it also to lose the beauty and the peacefulness, the tranquility that you find here. I mean, that's my dream. Somebody else may come after me and dream another dream, because that always happens. But just come back 2 years from now and see what we have done as a people, because we are going to do something.
In Liberia, this is Ed Robbins for Time.com and the International Reporting Project.
Very good.
So how much time?
But,
Do I have any more time?
of course, yeah.
So that was in my mind, hopefully, a different kind of a story than one would often see in these underreported places. But I think it also touches on the fact that, as Sugar said to me, she feels like the issues of recovery and the problems of recovery and development are all there in miniature in that small place. And it's really true. And the issues of even just bringing goods to market. I mean, that track to get to that town, it's just, even in the non-rainy season, was a big, dippy, runny road that wasn't all that far from Monrovia, but it took about 2.5-hour, 3-hour drive. And so she's a fantastic woman, and she's, chosen, going from an international stage as a peacemaker, to go back to her roots, and I think it's a fascinating piece. I've also got about 6 other stories at least. I also stayed longer than everyone because doing what I do takes more time. And so I went back to Firestone, which is a really intriguing place in terms of the issues it raises about corporate responsibility and what Sirleaf is trying to do in controlling the concessions that have defeated so many African nations rich in natural resources. It's really interesting to see that people are pushing back and seeming to gain some control over the natural resources, even though the multinationals are clearly very powerful. For example, right offshore from Edina is where the oil is going in. So I hope Sugar's dream is not swamped in New Orleans-type oil on the shore. But I've also done stories. I guess one of the biggest things I want to leave people with is I feel like I went to Liberia with a bit of a time lag, about a 3-year time lag in terms of the kind of research you get when you read books and or articles. It tends to be really focused on the war and the devastation. And I had done other stories on child soldiers. I was, felt very prepared to go out and talk to ex-combatants and do stories on that. And in this intensive tour, I realized, wait a minute. I mean, and I've been in Afghanistan through a period of time. I've been in Afghanistan from the period of hope, right, not long after the invasion. And I stuck with it for a number of years to the point where I literally saw that hope disappear. It just evaporated. And this is 6 or 7 years later, maybe 8 years later, from the Civil War. And what you see in the people is that hope that Sugar's talked about. And there are huge problems, enormous problems, but you sense that there's something there, and even the child soul, the ex-combatants I spoke with, you're asking them to dig back a long way. They want to go past that. I mean, it would be, what happened when the freshness of the Iraq War soldiers started to, the Iraq War is going on. It's a bad example, but in a certain way, that's 7-8 years. That's a long time they've been at peace. And so that was a shift as a reporter, as someone on the ground, that I felt I was going through, and that I wanted to bring back that aspect of it in my stories. And some of them are tougher stories on rape, et cetera, but a number of them are in this nature of a story, which is a more human level story, and trying to show that side of Liberia. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Teresa Wiltz. I'm the senior editor at The Root, which is a Washington Post website targeted toward Black news commentary issues. So we have a national and international audience, and my task was to go there, dig in, and find stories that are going to appeal to our readers. As others have mentioned, Liberia isn't on most people's radar. It's kind of like, where, what? American slaves? So when I got there, I was also in Afghanistan shortly after the invasion, and Monrovia reminded me, as weird as it sounds, so much of Kabul, and just that same kind of bombed out landscape, people trying to, of diverse ethnic groups trying to centralize and unite around a common cause, corruption, and women, and the whole kind of issue of women trying to empower themselves after being oppressed. Their statistics vary, but it's been said that anywhere from 60 to 90% of the women were raped during the war. Men were raped as well. And when I say women, I should actually say 60 to 90% of the female population. So rape became very much a part of the psyche. And at the same time, as the others have noted, there's this prevailing sense of hope, and particularly among women, middle-aged, older women, less so than younger women, interestingly enough, who were the peace warriors during and forced peace talks between the different warring factions. And so the women that we encountered who were featured in the documentary Pray the Devil Back to Hell, they were from the Women in Peace Building Network of West Africa, and they feel very empowered. I mean, they are feeling, you know, that very 1970s Helen Reddy, I am woman kind of thing. You see it less so in the younger women. But I just found this dichotomy there that was very hard to reconcile, and I'm still trying to figure this out. There's this burgeoning sense of feminism, like I asked Edwida Sugars if she considered herself a feminist, and she did something that you don't see very many women these days in America, particularly black women, doing. And she said yes, and she just kind of straightened up and she smiled. It was like, yeah, I'm a feminist. So how do you, and everywhere we went, you know, we encountered a lot of activists, male and female, and everyone is like, yay, women, rape is bad. And there's this kind of, because of radio campaigns and billboards and NGOs and, you know, Mama Ellen, the president, you know, really cracking down on the issue of rape. So everyone seems very sensitized to the issue, and yet it's a huge problem. So I couldn't figure out if, you know, it was yay women, we respect women if they're older, and the younger women are left to fend for themselves. That's, you know, I wasn't, you know, 10, 12 days felt like a long time, it felt like forever, but it's not enough time to like really be able to answer that question. My good friend Lori Cooper, who's been living in Liberia for 4 years, knows things a lot more. So for the women there, the biggest issue is that of economic empowerment. So, you know, they feel like a lot of lip service is being paid. They're feeling empowered, but they're broke. There's the unemployment rate in Liberia is estimated to be about 85%. Now that's a slightly misleading number because it really means 85% don't have work in the formal sense of the word, but everybody works there. Everyone. If you're a little kid, I mean, little old lady, there's just this very robust sense of work, and you rarely see beggars. I mean, literally, I saw 2, and the entire time we were there, and they were not Liberian. So the culture is of work. There's this kind of vibe of we're in this together, but underneath the surface is like all this pain and, you know, this legacy of extreme cruelty to each other. So they seem very much to want to overcome it, but how much of that is lip service? For me, it was hard to say. One thing that I thought was very interesting, that even though there was all this lip service paid to women, is if you get into a meeting and there were men and women, the men would just bloviate on and on and on and on. They would completely dominate the conversation. And then another one would get up and say, thank you very much, and then he would, you know, basically say the same exact thing that the guy before said. And so they would totally dominate the conversation. And then one lone woman would be able to kind of slip in and say something, and it would be so potent, and like the legislators that we met with. So I just felt like they were still kind of getting squashed in the process. And the women to me, were much more interesting in what they had to say. Maybe it's because they had to learn how to be concise, because otherwise they weren't going to get a word in edgewise. you're in a country where families were destroyed by war, and fathers were forced to rape their daughters in front of the rest of the family. Mothers were forced to have sex with their sons in front of the rest of the family. We met a former warlord who watched his mother be raped in front of him, and his sister was carried away by soldiers. And so he says that forced him to take up arms. And he says, I never killed anybody, I killed my enemies. So you're just seeing families that have been just wiped away. So as a result, I noticed there were a lot of young women who were single mothers, which kind of runs counter to what my limited, this is only my third time on the continent, where it was really interesting to me to see so many women were by themselves, university students working and raising children, some of whom were the legacy of rape. So they're raising children that they probably would not have chosen to have. I think that's about all I've got to say. I can open it up to questions.
Okay, thank you, Teresa. Teresa, Ed, and Suni. Very good scene setters. Covered a lot of ground there already. Now, the rules are this. We have about 40 minutes for questions and answers. When you raise your hand and I recognize you, wait for a microphone to arrive because we're being live web streamed. And so identify yourself then and pose your question. Try to be brief and so we can get as many contributions as possible. So we open it up to the floor. Any subject is okay. And we got one right down front here to begin.
Hi, my name is Terry Modulin. I'm chair of the U.S. chair of the board of an organization called Youth Crime Watch of Liberia, focused on youth crime prevention and youth development. My question is, do Liberians see the U.S. as the mother country, and what are their expectations of the United States?
Interesting question.
Yeah, I actually asked quite a lot of people that, trying to pursue it. Interesting answer. There is, of course, as I guess everyone here probably understands, the historic ties, both complex in that the ex-slaves became what they beheld. They became, bad overseers of a tiny minority overseeing the nation, leading to a lot of the tensions, the tribal peoples that followed. I asked a lot of people that, from professors to ordinary people on the street, and there is a lot of obvious connections to America, from the flag to the connections to American families here and all that. But and they expect America to come to the plate. But people were saying, well, Europe actually has come to the plate a lot more than America. And China. Especially China is doing a lot of the work there. And even though America has a big presence there, they feel a little bit let down, and America is not the dominant country in their mind. I thought people would start talking to me about America when I raised the issue, and I went to a place called it's like a tea room where people debate issues. And I raised that with their permission, I raised that as a debate issue. And they really didn't want to talk about it. They weren't that interested in America in that way. And that was interesting to me. It was not what I expected. I thought there would be a much stronger sense of tie. I think if you go to the Dominican Republic and they start talking, they'd be more tied to America because of baseball than I felt in Liberia. But that's my answer because I pursued it a bit.
No,
I would. Go ahead.
I would agree with that. I mean, our first day we traveled around the country with a history professor whose name is escaping me. And the language that he used was very interesting. I mean, they talked about the American slaves that came, and they called them the settlers. He also used language that, he could call them the mulattoes and octoroons and and if you go to so there's I think this sense of distance. I mean, it's kind of that's part of the history, but I don't think it's part of the daily history for most people. I expected there to be, one of the stories I wanted to do, and actually ended up becoming just a couple of paragraphs in another piece, was I was really interested in looking at the stratification and the racial stratification between the Americo-Liberians and indigenous Liberians, and I found it to really be, and probably because I wasn't there long enough, but way, way less of an issue than what I had anticipated. So I feel like the American part is a superficial background.
I don't know what the expertise level is in the room. I assume it's pretty high, but it's about a 5%. If you don't know, it's about a 5% or probably less, because a lot of people left Liberian ratio to the tribal peoples there and the indigenous peoples there, and that's, really small to be a ruling class for all that time. But the other interesting thing, and I had a long discussion about this with Sugars and a number of other people, the interesting thing is there's a lot of people who will tell you that the old resentments against the ruling class have actually been a bit washed away by the war. It kind of was somewhat of a leveling ground because everybody got pushed around. If you were in one part of the country, you ran to the other part of the country. There's more of a class distinction going on now than before. It's not necessarily defined on Americo-Liberian terms. It's more on you ran away to America and, you were safe, you got your money, you're coming back as a wealthy person, to rule us. And it's not, you're an Afro, So it's an interesting switch, and again, something you learn on the ground more than you would assume from reading.
But I did notice a lot of Obama T-shirts when I was there.
Yeah, and Obama business cafes. And
But one of I would talk to some of the parliamentarians, and one of the things that they sort of reminded us, because Ed and I kept asking, this special relationship, how do you see it? And one of the things that I guess known Rebecca Quito, what reminded us was like, when we really needed you, to step up to the plate, you didn't. You supported Tolbert, when he was cracking down. You supported Sam Doe during the worst. And, their memories are a lot more acute because they had to live through it. And people were talking more about China and the Chinese than they were about the Americans. That was a surprise.
China Inc.
China Inc.
Okay. Next question right at the back there.
Hi, Sia Willie, Howard University. I'm Liberian by birth. I've been here in the U.S. all my life. But anyway, thank you for your presentation on Liberia. And the first question basically somewhat parallels exactly what my point or my question now will be, is that did any of you see the need to clearly state the history of Liberia's and then its contribution to the conflict that arose? Because it's so easy to say a country founded by freed slaves when there were indigenous people already present and who certainly were marginalized. So when you have media outlets that are not succinct in terms of the history and very clear, what it leads later on is a lot of conflict, because later on you're going to have, yes, at this time, there are issues of class distinction more so than that. For a non-Liberian looking in, will only say, there's issues of class. No. There's an underlying current of ethnic conflict that is brewing between those indigenous Liberians that are now Western educated, because we've always had our African systems of education. So you now have those indigenous Liberians like myself that are Western educated. And then you also have Americo-Liberians that are now Western educated, but yet there's still a conflict for those of us on the level of consciousness. Did any of you see that?
Honestly, I think to see tensions like that and to really understand them, you've got to be there longer than we were. So, and we're meeting with people who are activists, when they're speaking with us, they've got a certain agenda. And that was something I really wanted to explore, but I only really had one person really talk to me about that, and that was someone who's the Deputy Defense Minister, who has spent a great amount of time here. And he talked about how because his great-grandmother was Americo-Liberian, and because he spent a lot of time in the States, the people try to tell him he's not Liberian. So one thing I want to say was very striking to me looking at the history, and I think most Americans aren't even cued into the history here. I mean, so I think there's just a need to educate, period. But that first day when we went to the National Hall, and there are pictures, photo illustrations of all the presidents from the first president to the current president. And the first president, John Jenkins Roberts, right. They call him the Octoroon. And
potentially Jefferson's.
Right. Supposedly Thomas Jefferson's.
Among them. Relative.
Child.
Descendant.
And when you look at him, he's got the brow. So who knows? But my point is what's very interesting is that when you look at the first presidents, the color spectrum goes from light, then dark, when you get to Tolbert and Doe, and then Samuel Taylor. It gets medium, and Ellen Sirleaf Johnson. So, I mean, I think just looking at the presidents says a lot, about the arc.
And also just to address where you started from in your question, I mean, the first thing we did when we landed was to get a tour with a history professor who was an indigenous person who, clearly resented a lot of the history and as it was told. And
he was the one talking about the mulattoes.
Right, and describing those kinds of things. So, yeah, you can, it's a very interesting thing in that it is in American textbooks when it is bothered to be mentioned along the level of, this is our connection. Look, these American slaves, they founded this country, and yeah, that's you get there and you find that the history of resentment that exploded in the Civil War is beneath that. But that's a big story unto itself. And for my media is actually very information difficult because it's an audio media, and I can only put so much in before you lose track of where you're at. Print is great for that, or doing a story just on that. And I did interview a number of people that were just about that issue. So if that answers your question about whether
longer than the rest of us, though.
I went off on my own at certain points, so I talked to different people than some of the ones they're mentioning. So if that helps.
Well, I'm spending a lot of time not trying to get involved because it's the impressions of our three journalists that we want to hear. But I've spent a lot of time in Liberia over a lot of years, as have a few other people in this room, and the fault lines dynamic that you have described is very real still. I see it up country, in particular out in the counties. And so it is still an issue and still something to be reckoned with for the near future for that country. Okay, next question. I see a hand right here, and then we'll come down here.
Hi, thank you. My name is Oisa Baye, and I had a question for Mr. Robbins and another one for Ms. Waltz. The first question was about the documentary you showed. I was just really curious about Sugars and how exactly she generates an income. I was just really curious. Does she have an NGO? Is she being funded by someone? I was just, because you mentioned she was an activist, but
personally, I don't know a lot about her personal history in that sense. I know that at one point she mentioned she was an interior decorator. I believe she's from a quite established family there. She's one of the old families, the King family, and
she would also get, though, a stipend from the government.
Really?
Being an elected official. I mean, she was an appointed official.
Oh, as the mayor?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, but that's got to be.
No.
She's building a house. And,
No.
Yeah,
really.
she's got kids in American schools, and she's been able to do what she does, I think, because she's had. She went to school in Geneva, in Bern, Switzerland. I mean, she comes from a moneyed family, most of whom left, and she refused to leave, and she stayed, even though they were all saying, go, 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 go. So she comes from a moneyed family.
And she carries herself that way.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that's the answer to that. Some of the other people in that movement were, literally just market women who rose up, but she wasn't. She was highly educated.
Okay, thank you. And the other question was what you mentioned about the older women having hope about the future and the younger women not so much. Could you talk a little more about that?
I shouldn't have said hope. I think the older women that we talk to, I mean, these are mostly the women, the market women, many of whom are illiterate. I think it's like 60% of women 15 to 49 in Liberia cannot read or write. But they talked about how hard it is to do outreach with young women. It's hard to get young girls educated. Prostitution is on the rise. Families have been dismantled. They will pay school fees, like WAPNet, the group that we met with. They'll pay school fees for young girls, and then they won't come to school because their families don't see the value in educating young girls. So there's a gap in terms of the sense of empowerment. Also, you figure these young girls are, war is going to be very fresh in their minds. For most of them, that would have been all that they knew, where the older middle-aged women and up have seen something else in the world. So, they talk very much about how they haven't figured out how to bring the next generation into the fold in terms of feminism and women's issues.
If I can offer a thought on that as well, because I know Edwina and quite well, and I was surprised I forgot her nickname Sugars when you were talking about her in there. I didn't make the connection, but that generation of Liberian women actually have some magnificent accomplishments on their plate, which gives them hope that they can change systems. The one I refer to most, besides getting through the war and the role they played in the immediate post-conflict situation, is a group called AFEL, which is the Association for Female Lawyers of Liberia. Made a dramatic change in the laws that affect women's inheritance rights and other legal issues just about 10 years ago. That is a real role model on the continent and maybe the world. And so it's a generation of women who have come a long, long way and seen what their pressure and their activism can do. And the younger women, of course, are facing a very destitute economy and post-conflict situation. As Teresa just said, the prostitution and things are sky high. They've only seen the bad side of it. They haven't been involved in the accomplishment. I think that may have some to do with it. Okay, the next question.
Patricia Fagan, U.S. Institute for Peace. I heard, I'm going to Liberia in a few weeks. I haven't yet gone. But the story that I'm told is that Monrovia is overcrowded with people from all over the country, different ethnicities, many, many, many of whom talk about going back to their original homes, and most of whom probably will not because there is no future there, and that this is especially true for younger people. In your conversations in Monrovia, did you discuss this issue of whether they would go back to their original homes or not? And when you were in the countryside, did you meet young people who were particularly anxious to leave and perhaps go to Monrovia?
One of the things that sort of surprised me was how bustling, how frenetic the pace was in Monrovia, because I expected to see a ghost town. This was like, the pictures I had seen 8 years ago. And I guess Monrovia still acts as a magnet. I didn't talk with anyone specifically who said they were thinking about going back, and that would be a difficult thing to do just on a practical matter, because the road system, and it was before rainy season when we went,
right after,
but the road system is just so absolutely poor. It's one of the biggest, one of the priorities of the government is to have the road system connect. Now, there may be some things that might change that. I think with the iron ore mining coming back on, Firestone actually getting back to full strength, there may be some things that draw people out. But I think if you're talking about cities draw people there.
Well, one thing that was very striking there in terms of young people is that you would meet 29-year-olds who are still in high school. And there's just like a total lost generation. And Wakai, who is our fixer, he's a 33-year-old Liberian journalist. And he told me, he said the definition of youth has expanded to 35. So in terms of coming to Monrovia, we spent some time in the upper parts of the country in Bong and Nimba County. And I think there for young people, I mean, the frustration is trying to get an education. And if they come to Monrovia, to University of Liberia, it's because that's a public university and it's more affordable than, say, Coddington University is in Bonga, so which they consider a better school. So, you know, they're just very limited in what they can do. And but, you know, talk about a work ethic. I mean, to be 29 and have kids and to be in high school, but to want to go to college.
I think there's also that something potentially brewing there, unless the speed of the economy really kicks in, which will be the next term will really tell, is, as in so many other countries, I mean, okay, so peace is there, the university's up and running again. We spent a lot of time with students who are still hopeful, and what jobs are they going to get? I mean, a lot of them talked about software or communications or this, that, and the other. I think a number of them may end up with NGO jobs. But in terms of, you know, sustainable part of the economy, jobs, it's really fuzzy to me personally where they're going to fit in and whether that will potentially be a brewing issue. They don't have an ideology that I could see to tie on to like they would have in, you know, the heyday of the 60s. They would have become, you know, communists and started, you know, advocating for more rights for the people at the low end of the ladder. But you know, I'm not sure where that energy is going to go, and I hope it doesn't go bad, but they need some outlet.
You also see a lot of young men on motorbikes, and then a lot of them are ex-combatants, and that's kind of, you hear talk about motorcycle gangs, but that's also how they make their living, is kind of hustling rides. I think just people, their choices are very limited, so I'm not so sure that it's like, ooh, let me go to like Monrovia like it's, you know, New York or Paris or something like that. It's
one of the reasons also people might be coming in is
Monrovia is also very expensive. Excuse me.
You know, we have the brewing situation in the Ivory Coast. I talked to Borkai a few days ago, and he told us the places that we visited in Nimba County and Bong County were now seeing the first influx of Ivorian refugees fleeing that country.
Yeah, the demographic of the problem you underlined is of course Montserrado County, where Monrovia has a bit over 1 million in population, 1.2 out of a country of a little over 3 million. So that right there tells you the scope.
To
yeah.
Name the year that it was.
Oh yeah,
order
the
pre-war.
size of
that. Yeah,
right, yeah. It's an immense influx. And there's some forceful repatriation, quite honestly, in that there were squatter communities in some of the old burnt-out ministry buildings just a few years ago, on the Central Bank and the old Ministry of Defense. You could drive by on the main road coming in from the airport, going into town, and you'd look up at the old Ministry of Labor, and you'd see the laundry hanging from the windows, and there was reported to be 1,200 people in that building alone. The government has removed those people, given them resettlement allowances, and many of them just moved to other slum areas, but some are going back. And then there's this influx, really serious influx from across the border now. And although Bonga doesn't seem like a great place, but there's a lot of activity up there, commercial activity and trade activity and stuff relating to the border areas, cross-border areas. Oh, many hands now. Let's go one way in the back, and then we'll come to one in the front here.
Thank you. My name is Bai Ackridge. I'm the chair of the state of Maryland's sister state relationship with Liberia, and that's specifically with Bong and Maryland counties, Maryland for obvious reasons. I've got a two-pronged question. I'm interested that you really haven't focused on the election. So I want to ask you what your sense is of the prospects for President Sirleaf next year. And two, about corruption. I've been impressed that she has been very forthright in admitting that corruption is so big that she can't handle it. So what was your sense of corruption in the country? And secondly, what's your sense of her prospects for winning the election next year, and what if she doesn't?
When we met with her, I don't think Ellen Johnson Sirleaf thinks anything is beyond her. In fact, she laid out a program. She said that the biggest problem is compensation, and she had raised the salaries significantly. But, we're talking about a country that has an annual budget, or at least last year, $350 million. There's only so much you can do. There are only so many people.
Better than the 50 they had a little
when they started out. But what Steve and I have talked about since I got back is that this opening she has to be able to get the foreign investment, to be able to translate it into a better life for Liberians, and everyone I've talked to says 2 to 3 years, because the patience at that point is gonna run out. Now, I did do a piece. The first piece I did for WYPR talked about politics, talked about the election and continuity, and it named some of the challengers. Since we left, we had talked about this at lunch, about you get a different feeling up country than you do in Monrovia. I think handicapping it, people probably would say that the chances that she'll be reelected to a second 5-year term are pretty good. We left about 2 weeks after we left. Her most significant opposition seems to be crumbling apart. George Wee, I guess, would probably be or it looks like he's the biggest challenger, but that's a decision for Liberians to make. She talked about, one of the things we talked about in the piece was like, okay, what happens if you don't win? What about all of these plans? She says, well, that's not up to me. That'll be up to the next government. I can't tell them what to do. What she was saying, and what people have said before, is that the most important thing is for that second election to take place and to see that it is being representative of the will of the people, and that there's a constitutional basis, because look what happened next door in what's happening in Cote d'Ivoire right now. Look what happened in Kenya. Look at what happened in other places. Liberia's Liberia's recovery is very, very precarious, because a whole lot of things have to go right in a small amount of time in order for this journey back or its journey forward to really, succeed. Ellen is well known here. She's well respected here in Washington. That's one thing that has to do with it. But at the end of the day, she's going to be judged on what I'm judged on and what my reporters are judged on. What have you done for us lately? And that is a verdict that will be delivered by the Liberian electorate in October.
To answer your question, though, about the corruption, it's very much part of the consciousness there. And it's, again, as an outsider, it's hard for me to gauge how much of it is really bad and how much of it is bad because they say it's bad. But because there's certain awareness there that I haven't seen in other countries that I visited about corruption. We met with a group in Bond County of young people that were the Anti-Corruption Club.
From students to women who were not literate in the marketplace.
Yeah.
Talking about corruption, selling their little nuts. That was their entire market sale. It was very impressive that way. But
yeah, or teachers, young women talked about teachers demanding
yeah.
sex, or I'll flunk you, that kind of, or nurses, hospitals or medical centers running out of medicine because nurses who aren't paid enough sell the drugs to someone else. So, a lot of it, from what I understand, is people just hustling, and because everybody's broke.
And people hear about all this money coming in, this
yeah,
investment coming in. Where is
billions.
it? Yeah.
Where is
Yeah.
it? We don't see it. Where's it going? And they're used to that. And I actually had an interesting encounter in the airport on the way back. It was with someone who, for want of a better term, I'll call part of a Accountants Without Borders team. That is an international team that's flown in to help put the books together with the government. And the stories he told were off the record and amazing. And it was basically, he said there were literally no books. Mm-hmm. There was literally no books. It would say, $250,000, Minister of Agriculture. Mm-hmm. And then he just that was his. That was his little kingdom. And, you know, there might be a scratch note here or there, but that was it. And that's why even in our interview, Sirleaf said we are now automating it, meaning they had gotten an Excel spreadsheet that was going to show the entire government's working budget. So, I mean, I think she is, for whatever reason it is, has risen above a lot of the endemic corruption. And it's, you know, in a small place like that, she might do it. And she's been brought up with this World Bank kind of UN attitude towards that. And that's also the reason everyone says she'll get reelected, is because they feel there's a lot of support for her, but even those who resent her say, look, we know how the game's played. The international community, the investment community, is not going to really firmly invest in Liberia until they get the assurance that the second election is going to happen in her favor. And so I think that's a good thing. So I think she'll be reelected, and the corruption is pretty endemic, but she's trying.
But then you also encounter people, especially up along Nimba and Bond County, who talk about how life was better under Charles Taylor, and if he came back, you know, they'd vote for him again. So.
Yeah, there seems to be no doubt in most of the country, except a small educated group, that if Charles Taylor came back, he would probably be elected in a minute. He's hugely popular.
Which is unfathomable.
My next question is right here.
Hi, Bob Berg, Alliance for Peace Building. Two aspects of resource flows which I wanted to ask you about. At the beginning of the government, they did a brilliant thing by putting out block grants to communities so that resources would just get out there if the communities agreed. And I'd sort of, when your film piece indicated Sugars was having some difficulty getting resources, and I'm sort of wondering if you all saw resources continuing out, or is that a big national problem of getting resources out there? The second discussion at the beginning of the government was, how are we going to make sure that the constituency, largely of women, gets microcredit or other kind of, you know, understands the government is grateful for their support and wants to keep that going. Is there anything out there?
I'm sorry, could you just rephrase that last second part?
That at the beginning there was concern about whether the vast number of women who supported Sirleaf's government were going to see some benefit from the government through microfinance or other ways of establishing a stake with the government. And I'm wondering whether you see that anything happening along these lines.
Well, let me answer the question that was addressed to me, the bit I know about that, and then I think Teresa talked with people at the Market Women for Peace, or maybe about the issue of the fact that they weren't getting work and they were broke and trying to be peace activists. But the first part of the question is, the answer would be, Sugars talked with me about there is no real budget, there is no governmental taxes that come the way of these small places and the way the system is set up.
Yeah, those billboards, pay your taxes.
Yes.
Yeah, but those are federal taxes, and you know, she depends on municipal taxes in a place where there's a lot of farmers there, but not much money flowing through
not
it.
a real cash economy.
Yeah, it's not a cash economy. So, and the it's so small and out of the way that the NGOs are not really, they're not there. There's no NGOs there. I'm not faulting them. It's just, it's not there. So she is actually looking to the community in exile. The diaspora is her thing, and she's trying to do enterprise like her eco lodges to bring people in and things like that. But no, there is no system to get it to the hinterlands, and you know, she actually thinks it's critical that the money does not get concentrated in Monrovia. But I'll let someone else go to the next part. The women, are they getting the microcredit?
I mean, my limited short time period there, I mean, I didn't see any real evidence of microcredits, and you know, the women that I spoke to were very much struggling. I mean, they said, we have nothing.
Now, one of the things that Ed and I went into Syncor, and we talked with a man who runs a susu, which were sort of like these sort of community banks that were running, and he was saying that he had 1,500 people, and it was growing all the time, and people were going to the susus much more than they didn't trust the regular banks. Some people were illiterate or had a hard time dealing with regular banks, but the susus are being credited that, and the remittances, about $350 to $400 million a year is sent back from Liberians in the diaspora to Liberia. And that area around the bridge near, Providence Island, we were told 3 years ago there was nothing there. There was no commerce at all there. But when we went there, it was just absolutely bustling. Mm-hmm. I said a lot of that were borrowing through the SUSU system or through remittances that were sent back home. So I guess if that's microcredit, then that's it. But we don't know. But it's believed that $350 to $400 million a year is sent back from Liberians abroad, and that is equivalent to or larger than the budget last year.
There's a great deal of, we come back to the corruption question that enters into the answer to your question, but also just a lack of experience in management failures. The development funds in each county are administered by the county executive, by the county superintendents and by their superintendent for development. And having done a lot of work in the last year or so with those county superintendents, I know that they're really struggling with that and application of those funds and control of those funds. Going back to the corruption issues, a lot of these funds, government funds, would actually go into individual bank accounts of officials and not be trackable, traceable. So there's a lot of that going on. We're about actually 6 or 7 minutes from the end of our session, so I'm going to take 2 more questions and take them, I'm going to take 3 more questions, but that's all. I've picked them out. Don't anybody else raise their hand, because I'll just have to ignore you. And we'll take them all at once. So be brief, and we'll let the panelists then respond to those questions and make any closing remarks they want. First one is right at the back of the room. Then there's a gentleman right in front of him, right there. No, the guy right there.
Back.
But then the one you started to hand it to, and then this gentleman here with the mustache right in front of him. Mm.
Thank you very much. My name is Christopher J. Nipe, and I want to thank you for this program. I am the first Secretary for Political and Consular Affairs at the Embassy of Liberia. Mm-hmm. And just about the 9th hour, I got this email, and I thought I should come in to hear what was being said.
You're very welcome.
So I'm going to use that as a ladder climbing from the bottom to come to the top of some of your information. But for those of us from Africa, we normally want you to understand the lesson, and so we try to use proverbs.
May I ask you, sir, to be very brief and do not give us too many teaching points here? Okay.
Now, we talk about forceful repatriation, and I think you're talking about the Chinese hospital. And I want to bring to the attention of the gathering that it was never forceful. It was based on their request. Having clarified that, I want to just go up to the point of the girls. After Madam Selif got to the hem of authority, she brought it back to school program where we have a little more than 500,000 girls in school. Then we have, for the macro credit, we have Bob Johnson has pumped in a lot of cash in the economy, and which has transformed part of what you see around the Johnson Street Bridge. And I'm going to go to the Talbot Doe's administration, where it was been said, allegedly said, that when Liberia needed America most, they didn't come. But America has been there for Liberia, even as I speak. And then we come to the era, we have 4 eras: the slave era, the return of the freedmen, the war, and of course the election. This is now a time of healing. And we are not going to go back to war. We will certainly not go back to war. So if anybody were to think in those directions, that, oh no, that we go big going back to war, that will not be the case.
I think, sir, that's a very good point to end on, because I believe all of us found that sentiment all over Liberia.
So
not going back to war. Thank you very much. Can we have the next question, please? And the
I
following
am Nat a Liberian representative, but I am a Liberian, a former graduate from the School of International Service at American University. About 2 years ago, I went back to Liberia. My background is international peace and conflict resolution, peace building. And after doing some work in Washington, D.C., I decided to go back to Liberia, and I actually established the Center for Peace Education. And basically what the Center for Peace Education is teaching peace at the local level and trying to introduce peace education within the classroom, making it as a subject for our young brothers and sisters who have gone through the conflict and to try to rebuild Liberia through that. When I heard that you guys were in town, I actually saw it in the front page Africa newspaper, and I was wondering and happy and like, yes, these guys are going to visit us and they're going to talk to a little NGO like us who are trying to build peace at the grassroots level. However, I am a little disappointed that you guys didn't focus much on little groups like this that trying to build peace, and trying to change the mindset of our young brothers and sisters, especially the ex-combatants and some of the same very people you are talking about that have experienced the conflict through all along. So next time, I hope when you come to Liberia, check out the Center for Peace Education so we can talk more.
Okay, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And right in
Can
front
I just
here.
say
Yep.
something in response very quickly? We were on an incredibly tight schedule, and we apologize to all these great groups like yours that have been started and doing important things there. We were on a morning, like 8 in the morning till 7 at night schedule, and we did talk to peace groups, but it tended to be more in Gabanga. We definitely talked to peace groups, and we talked to students about those issues very much so, but we just didn't talk to particular.
Okay, thank you, Ed. Yeah. One last question, please.
Hello, I'm Leon Weintraub, University of Wisconsin. I wanted to ask, in your travels both in Monrovia and around the country, if you heard any discussion of investment from abroad. Particularly, I have in mind that a few years ago there was a story of Mr. Johnson of BET Network, I think was going to invest in a big hotel complex. I want to understand, has that come to fruition?
Yes, it is.
What's the word about other investments?
It's the first five-star resort.
Making something?
And to be built in 30 years. It's out there.
Kandahaja, yeah. Well, you respond to that and any closing remarks, because this will have to be our last exchange. We are at the end of our time.
Yeah, it's there. I tried to interview Bob Johnson. When I came back, I talked. I'm very good friends with the guy who negotiated the deal. He stood me up, which is not news to anybody. But Ellen Johnson Sirleaf asked him personally when she came about 3 years ago to set up a facility for investment in Liberia, and he volunteered $30 million. He put up $3 million of his own money. The resort is the first. We didn't get to visit it when we were out there, but he's put that up, and she is appealing to a lot of African Americans to invest in Liberia. She's actually trying to get Oprah to come back, because Oprah did her genetic test, and it came out that her ancestors are Pele.
I would say, though, real quickly, that the Johnson resort, it's called Kandahaja, is very controversial because it's immensely expensive. It can't be afforded by by Liberians, and most of the people who stay there, or Nigerians. Well, actually, probably not so. It's used mostly by traveling firefighters from the United Nations or America or someplace. Okay.
Oh,
no. Well, any other? There was a broader question than just Bob Johnson. It was on investment flows.
Certainly China.
I mean, China is so massive. If you haven't, I mean, everyone here is probably an Africa hand in some ways. It's just to see it on the ground, to see the Chinese road crews doing the roads.
Or just flying in on the
you would have
flight
expected American crews or something, or I mean,
or seeing them interact with Liberians, like we went through red light. I'm seeing Chinese walking through red light, the market. I'm like, wait a minute, slow down. Okay, what did I just see here? And they're out, and there are probably more Chinese restaurants on the road in from the airport than there are in Chinatown here in D.C.
So it can't be underestimated. That aspect of the investment is not just European or American. And we did run into quite a number of people who were diaspora people who had set up hotels, restaurants, things like that, dealing with the money trade. We are not aware of, just because the nature of our trip is so fast, the business community who may have set up construction businesses and those kinds of things that people set up when they return. But on an individual level, we were, had a lot of big fish to fry.
Anything else?
Libyans, of course, are supposedly going to try to resuscitate the Hotel du Corps, which was the big hotel before the war.
A spectacular setting.
Yeah, I stayed there once. Any closing remarks, Teresa? Anything else you want to say?
No, I think that I'm just addressing the gentleman back there about microcredits and Bob Johnson. I mean, the previous question had been about, did we see evidence of microcredits for women? And to my knowledge, no, I have not seen that with Bob Johnson. The women I encountered would jump at the chance to have microfinancing, but those were the women I encountered in the country.
Okay. Well, let me thank and invite you to thank our audience, our panelists, and thank the audience too.